What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be revisiting the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in late 2022. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 392, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So this is a really good display here. At 6.7 inches, this is definitely a really large display, which is a good thing if you're consuming a lot of content or you're just going to be on your phone a lot in general. With an aspect ratio of 20:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And when you're doing stuff like reading, browsing the web, using social media, with a form factor like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And in addition to the size and dimensions, the image quality is really good on this phone as well. With the 1080p resolution, of course, the image is going to be nice and sharp. And with the Super AMOLED Plus display, the colors are also nice and vibrant, the brightness is really good, and the viewing angles are great as well. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, this display is going to be a lot easier to see than something like an LCD, for example. So in general, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, consuming a lot of content and stuff like that, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to be a great choice. Now when it comes to storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. And while, of course, this is nowhere near the 2TB you get with the $1,600 iPhone, for example, I would say that overall, for a more affordable budget option, 128GB, especially with the microSD card expansion, is still a pretty good amount of storage, and for most people, this will be perfectly fine. Now for security features, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, this phone does have Face Unlock, and it also has a fingerprint scanner right here in the display. So real nice and premium looking, but let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it worked real well, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Definitely nice to get both options here, because while pretty much every phone in this price range has both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, there's still a lot of phones, even higher end phones like iPhones and Google Pixel phones, for example, that still only have one or the other. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with the 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, this phone has pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. Really the only thing it's missing is a telephoto lens, which I will say is a little too bad because the predecessor, the Samsung Galaxy A72 5G, actually did have a telephoto lens. And I know just from using that feature all the time on my S21 FE, when you're taking lots of pictures, getting that extra zoom can be really nice. But other than this, again, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has pretty much everything, especially considering, again, this is not a flagship phone. While being pretty premium for a budget phone, it still is a budget phone all the same. And with that in mind, for what it is, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G again has pretty much everything you could normally expect in a phone like this. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, this phone is going to be a great choice. And aside from just the features, the photo quality itself is also really good as well. Sure, it's still not going to be quite as good as a flagship phone, but for most people, I do think the photo quality we get with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to be perfectly fine. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 4K in both the rear and front cameras. So if you're recording a lot of videos, maybe something you want to share on YouTube, for example, where the quality is a little bit more important, then a phone like the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G that can record 4K videos is going to be a great choice. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is getting 8GB of RAM with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. When it comes to actual performance, it's kind of an interesting spot with this phone. On one hand, this phone, while actually being almost as fast as an entry-level flagship phone, is still not quite there, and phones like the iPhone SE, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, and the Google Pixel 6a are still going to be a little bit faster, maybe not by a whole lot, but the difference is still going to be noticeable. That being said though, on the other hand, compared to pretty much every other mid-range phone, stuff like the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, and the OnePlus Nord N20 5G to name a few, compared to all the phones like that, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is going to be significantly faster. So in general, the performance of this phone is really about halfway between a mid-range phone and an entry-level flagship phone. So if you are going to be on your phone a lot, consuming all kinds of content and maybe doing stuff like mobile gaming, and you really just don't want to spend $1,000 on a phone, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will be a good choice for that kind of situation. Now I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and here are the scores I got. What I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be an upgrade for you. In general though, I would say if you're coming from any lower end or mid-range phone, this phone will most likely be a solid upgrade. But if you're coming from maybe an older iPhone or something like a Samsung Galaxy S10, then just keep in mind, while the performance you get with this phone phone might be decently close to some of the really old flagship phones, it's still not really going to be exactly an upgrade. And if you really want that flagship performance experience, then while this phone is really fast for what it is, you're still probably going to want to go with a slightly higher end device. Now for the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. With a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger and you want a phone that's really going to last all day, this phone is going to be a great choice for that. And with 25-watt fast charging, although it's definitely not the best fast charging in the world, in my experience, this phone still does have really good charging speeds, and for most people, you're probably not going to have an issue. That being said though, in case you don't know, although this phone does have 25-watt fast charging, keep in mind, in order to actually take advantage of this, you will need a 25-watt fast charger, and in case you don't have one, I will be linking to my favorite fast charger in the video description, so if you need one, definitely check that out. Now as far as the software goes, this phone does currently have Android 12, and it is going to be getting Android 13 really soon. In addition to this, with Samsung software support, you can expect to get several major updates with this phone as well. So if you are someone who likes to have the latest version of Android, a Samsung Galaxy A series phone like this is going to be a great choice for you. Another thing to keep in mind is that with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we are getting NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you'll be happy to know you can do that with this phone. Now something else about this phone's design I do want to point out here is that unfortunately with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're not getting a headphone jack. So if you have a normal pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, keep in mind with this phone, you will actually need an adapter to use them. Another thing I do want to point out about the A73 5G is that in case you didn't know, this phone is not officially launched in the US. So if you are in the US and you do want it, you are going to have to get it factory unlocked. And while on one hand, this really isn't that big a deal, just keep in mind, you're not going to find the same kind of promotions with this phone as you might find on other mid-range phones you get through a US carrier. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G still worth buying in late 2022? In general, I feel like this really depends on what you're looking for. On one hand, this phone is basically just a slightly more premium version of the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. So if you're really just looking for a mid-range phone and you want something with a decent amount of features, good performance for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music and stuff like that, and you want something that just looks and feels a little bit more premium than your average phone, I feel like in that kind of situation, especially if you're in the US, something like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to make a lot more sense because that phone is really similar to this one, except since you can get it through a US carrier, you're most likely going to find much better deals on it. On the other hand, if you want something a little bit higher end that has closer to flagship level performance and a lot of the more premium features, and in general you're really just more of a heavy user, I feel like honestly, the A73 5G, while still objectively being a really good phone, is still really not going to make sense in that situation either. The reason I say this is because again, this phone is not officially launched in the US, so you're not going to find any good deals on it, and honestly, for the price you're most likely going to get this phone for, through a US carrier, you can probably just get the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE instead. And when it comes to flagship features and performance and stuff like that, while the A73 5G again is a pretty good device, the S21 FE is honestly still a step up from this. So in general, while I would say independently, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is definitely a really good phone in the context of late 2022, especially in the US. For the money, I still think there are better options. But that being said, if you happen to find this phone for a really good deal, or maybe you just really want this phone and you don't mind paying for something that's factory unlocked, then again, by itself, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is still a great device. And while I really don't think it would be my first choice in any situation, if you do somehow happen to get this phone, you still probably won't be disappointed. Now, once again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.